My third speaker today is Ed Shemelya, and he is with the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. This is commonly referred to as HIDTA, and their primary purpose or mission is to reduce the demand for drugs, as well as identifying and disrupting drug trafficking organizations. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you very much. Okay, good morning, everybody in Colorado. I'm actually coming to you from Kentucky, and most of you probably do not realize that Kentucky, outside of California, with respect to illicit marijuana, is the second largest producer of illicit marijuana in the nation outside of the state of California. And my background I'm 30 years with the Kentucky State Police, and just about all 30 of those years was in drug law enforcement. I've been with the National Marijuana Initiative since 2013, and a little bit about NMI. We are one of the 3 national initiatives that support our 33 HIDTAs across this country. And a HIDTA, of course, is a high intensity drug trafficking area. You already heard our mission. What we do at NMI, our principal focus is to talk about what we are seeing in this country with respect to the legalization of marijuana, either medically or medicinally, which I don't like that term, or recreationally, which I do not like that term, and refer to it as commercial, and that's how I will refer to it moving forward. Because I don't know about you folks in Colorado, but in Kentucky, we consider recreation something like hiking or biking or fishing or hunting, and not getting baked on weed is not my idea of recreating. But then again, that's a whole nother story. What we're going to try to accomplish in the next 35 minutes is talk to you about what we see across this country with respect to legalized marijuana and the impacts. What we see is, as I alluded to, in the 33 states that have medicalized this, or in the 10 states plus the district that have commercialized this, we see some common issues and some common concerns. You have already, from our 2 previous speakers, Henny and Wendy, you've already addressed several of these concerns. What I want to try to do is highlight a couple of them, but these are common things that we see in all 33 of these states. And understand from this perspective that you don't become a commercial state unless you first become a medical state. The methodology is tried and true. And the reason you become commercial is it doesn't take very long for you to see that there just aren't enough medical patients to support an industry. And commercialization, as I will show you later on, from a taxation standpoint, is why states go that way. But these are the common issues, and Dale and I, my partner, break these down in 3 areas: public health issues, public safety issues, and other topics. And when you look at these are all common. These are the things that we see with consistency and regularity in each and every one of them. And again, one of our missions actually is to tell you what we are seeing and tell you what the science and what the data is showing. So basically that folks and policymakers can make informed decisions. And here's part of the problem. You know, when you look at this from a perspective and you look at marijuana and understand, we all have an idea of what we think marijuana is. And you've already heard the previous 2 speakers tell you that it isn't anything like it was 5 or 6 years ago. But we frame what our thoughts are on marijuana about what it was when we actually experienced it. Hence lies the problem with a lot of policymakers, is their frame of reference about this drug was what it was when they experienced it. And if you look around at a lot of policymakers, have got a lot of gray hair like I do, and therefore they have a completely different perspective on that. But I'm going to start this out, and as I do this talk across the country, and before COVID, Dale and I, and Dale's actually from Aurora, Colorado, we do this about, each of us do this about 150 times a year across the country. And I always start this talk out, I understand I am from Appalachia, from South Central, but I spent most of my law enforcement career in Eastern Kentucky, the heart of Appalachia. we were the center, the epicenter for the opiate epidemic in this country that started in my state in the mid 90s as a pharmaceutical grade product that has since morphed to heroin, fentanyl, and so on. We are still losing about 1,700 Kentuckians every year to opioid overdose deaths. But I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to make a statement that some of you are going to shake your head, even what I've just told you. I'm going to talk to you for the next 25 minutes about what I think is the most dangerous drug in America, and it's marijuana. And here's why. I think this is the most dangerous drug in America for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, when you take a look at all the other illicit drugs in America and you combine them, it does not even come close to half the admitted marijuana uses in this country. But that's not what makes it dangerous. What makes this drug so dangerous, it's the most misunderstood of all the illicit drugs. You know, you've seen the before and after meth pictures, the 18-year-old high school graduate, and then 9 months later after meth use, she's unrecognizable or he's unrecognizable. Those are very stark. And what we know about this drug, there is so much disinformation and misinformation about this drug, and so much information that is given to our young people that's just factually incorrect. And it's a hugely profitable industry and relying heavily on claims that have little or no scientific basis or validity to support their argument. Comes in numerous forms, and we've already touched on those. When you look at their product deviation, I think what's important to understand when you look at these states, about 70% of the sales aren't from the crude drug. And I'm talking about the flower. What we would normally see is in the old Cheech and Chong movies, the rolled joint that you light and smoke. About 70% of market share are anything but that. And you've already saw some pictures from Annie and from Wendy. We're talking about edibles, oils, waxes, shatter, and all the other products that are imaginable here. Go the wrong way here. And this kind of supports what I'm telling you. SAMHSA data, when you look at, and this is the latest out, you know, almost 41 million admitted regular marijuana users, and you look at all the other substances that are there. This is why I make the assertion that this is such a dangerous drug. And understand that the science, and particularly with our young people, it's already been alluded to, there's a science around the harms. We're talking about potencies that is in the 6 to 8 to 10%. And we know how stark that is, particularly to those under 25 years of age that don't have a fully developed brain. But we are not talking about the drugs that science is predicated on. We're talking about a completely different drug that the science really doesn't exist yet to know what the actual harms are to the drugs that our kids are initiating on. And we see this number growing every year. You know, when you're looking at 41 million people that admit to regular marijuana use, and this, I think, is the alarming figure, is those individuals that are admitting to using 200 times or more a year. And you look at that, that's increased 37% since 2002, and nearly 1 in 3 people since in 2016 admit to using 200 times or more a year. And that's an alarming figure. And I understand that they aren't using the marijuana that was around when I got in law enforcement in 1979, that was 1.5% to 2 to 3% in crude. And if you could find some hash oil that was 6 to 8%, that's not what they're using. They're using substances in its crude form in your state alone that is testing out above 20% in the crude form, but in extractions that are in every kind of vessel imaginable and every product imaginable, they go anywhere from 30 up to 99%. And that's what makes this so dangerous, because folks just don't understand the dynamics surrounding today's marijuana. You look at this, and this is critical. If you don't remember anything, this is all about potency, because potency is driving all of these other issues that I alluded to in my first slide there. It's all about potency. Today's potency is at unbelievable levels, and it's all thanks to you fine folks in Colorado. Because what happened with Amendment 64 and when you approved it in 12 and enacted it in 13, basically the industry, without fear of federal intervention, was able to bring in scientists, botanists, agronomists, and they have genetically modified and engineered this plant, much as we have done with our traditional agricultural commodities, soybeans, corn, wheat, to increase yield, and most importantly here, to increase potency to levels that even in 2014, the December 2014 issue of High Times, they said from a botanical standpoint, it would be impossible to grow marijuana that would exceed 30% on the vine. And you fine folks in Colorado did that in 14, and you continue to do that every year, exceed that. So it is indeed possible when you genetically engineer and modify that. It now comes in about every form and fashion that is imaginable there. And it's all about THC, and it's all about potency. And why? It's because the consumer is demanding it. But what the downside to these higher potency products, we really don't understand the risks that are being posed to the user, the risk to addiction and cognitive impairment. The great thing about, if there is a good thing about, any good thing about legalization, it is spurring more research. So we currently have more research being done about marijuana, not only the potential beneficial components in marijuana, but also the harms with high potency marijuana. The downside to that, we're probably still a good 5 to 7 years from clearly understanding what today's high potency marijuana is going to how it's going to impact our most vulnerable users, and that's our young people. And that's what really should be the focus here, is the risk to our youth. And that's 25 years and younger. Those that don't have that fully developed frontal lobe, that are the greatest risk to THC's impactment. And you look at the bottom of this slide, you look at how potency is evolved. And if you look at 1995, 4% was considered really good marijuana. You know what happened in 96? 96, California was the first state with Prop 215 to medicalize this drug. But from 95 to 2014, nothing really changed with respect to potency of marijuana. Yeah, 8 points is statistically significant, but in the realms of things, if you're not in that at-risk group, this really wasn't considered a powerful drug at that time. And then you all came around. Colorado came around, and you did what you did, followed closely by Oregon and Washington, and now we're at 10 states plus the district that have legalized commercially. We've seen an explosion in potency to where in 2017, we're averaging between 23 and 34%. And now we have THC, as Wendy already alluded to, at 99% THC. And this kind of gives you an idea of how potency, this is averages on the illicit market. Now, this is not the legal market. This is just how the illicit market is kind of gravitating up with. It also points out what Wendy alluded to about how our breeders, both illicit breeders and our legal breeders, have virtually bred the CBD. And the only two cannabinoids of the 100 plus cannabinoids in marijuana anybody's ever heard of is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, or the cannabidiols, or the CBDs. For whatever reason, when God put this planet on this earth, the CBDs basically act to they block the CB1 receptors in the brain, THC's ability to attach to those receptors. So long as that molecular ratio is about a 1-to-1, it doesn't matter how long your joint is, you're not going to get high. But what we have seen, this bottom green line there, is our CBD production in this country illicitly is dropped to next to nothing. And that's what I tell folks. If you are a CBD user, particularly of hemp products, I use the expression caveat emptor, buyer beware. You should also be very concerned that the levels of CBD that are advertised are not probably indicated, or not actually indicated on the bottle. Plus, all of these products contain higher levels of THC there. So if you're actually subject to a workplace drug screening and you're using a CBD product that you think trying to manage whatever condition, because they basically purport to take care of about anything that ails you, you should be very careful if you're ingesting this product orally and you're subject to a workplace drug screening. You may not have a good outcome there. But you look at these products and you look at the how the evolution of these products, and I've already alluded to, almost 70% of your market share is anything but crude marijuana. And it's because of potency, because this is where the potency lays. By concentrating the marijuana, extracting the THC, and then putting it in these various products. What is popular with our young people are these vaping devices, principally because of the stealth of these devices. They're everywhere. And law enforcement has no idea whether you're vaping nicotine or you're actually vaping THC. And then again, I run into these in my last trip to Denver. Now you can infuse them. They're in toothpicks. I'm a toothpick chomper. I had to take mine out before this presentation, but it kind of soured me on chomping toothpicks. But this is what we've gotten to. It never ends. We're infusing CBD and THC into toothpicks. Give me a break. But as Wendy already alluded to, this is what's driving the market. This is what the consumer is demanding. Pictures I took in your dispensaries a year ago, and then THCA, something that popped in about 2018 that we started to hear about, that we're getting so sophisticated that we're actually extracting it at molecular level. And as Wendy alluded to, it looks like methamphetamine. And the beauty of this for the individual that's in possession of it, law enforcement can hit it with the standard field testing and it's not going to show anything, because she's already stated that it does not convert to THC till it hits an ignition source. So essentially you got to put it in your pipe, you got to hit it to about 300 degrees, and then it instantly converts to THC. She already told you it's some of the most expensive drug on the market. It's selling for about $200 a gram. Understand that our young people have the ability to initiate at something at 99% THC that is commercially available in your dispensaries in Colorado. It's absolutely amazing. But this is where the profit is. And this is why the industry is gravitating towards potency. And the consumer is demanding, but this is where the profit is. I'm going to touch, and I told you, I'm going to touch a little bit about traffic safety. And first, I want to preference this because I know Henny hit a little bit on it. What we are seeing in the 33 states that have medicalized and the 10 plus the district that have commercialized this substance, that marijuana is playing an increasing role in not only traffic collisions, but fatalities. I want to make the statement right off the bat. I don't want you to walk away and say that I'm talking about causation, because I'm not there yet. And we're not there yet with the data. But I think we can say with the greatest degree of certainty that there is a clear association between marijuana's increasing involvement in motor vehicle crashes, collisions, and fatalities. And these are your numbers that reflect that. And you'll see the orange when you commercialized your medical in 9, and when you went full-blown recreational commercialization, you see a slow uptick. And we saw about a 2-point drop between 2017, and these were for operators that tested positive in all traffic deaths in your state. You're looking at in 2017, 1/4 of all operators involved in fatalities tested positive. It dropped to 23%. I'm curious to see where that number lies in 2019. That data should be, the FARS data is about 2 years behind. So we should get the 2019 data sometime after the first of the year. So I'm curious to see if we're starting to see a downward trend or if we see an uptick. Understand there that when you start talking about data points here, you have to understand that what we're talking about, and you would like to see data over years so you can look at trends. And this is relatively new. When you look at y'all instituting in 2013, the first state to commercialize, we've got about 7 years worth of data with respect to its impacts. Unlike alcohol and tobacco, where we have a 50, 60, 70-year rich history of data that we can draw some clear causation analysis from, we're not quite there yet with marijuana. But the early data is alarming and should be concerning to all involved. This slide shows you the drug combinations in your state for operators involved in fatal crashes, and I'm sorry about the typo there, who tested positive for marijuana in 2018. And you look at marijuana and alcohol. The argument that I hear is that once we commercialize marijuana, our alcohol consumption will drop. But if you look at your numbers, if anything, your alcohol consumption is increased dramatically. But you look at 30% of folks arrested or tested positive in fatal crashes had both marijuana and alcohol. 25% had marijuana only. And then you look at 30% had marijuana and other drugs, but no alcohol. Marijuana, you cannot argue that marijuana is not playing an increasing role in fatal crashes in your state based on this data. And what we're seeing too is the same similar thing, not only in Washington and Oregon, but in California, now in Michigan with their first report out. Illinois is too early into this thing. Nevada also. We are seeing a predominant role or an increase in marijuana's involvement in traffic crashes and fatalities. And it'll be interesting to see where that data goes as we continue in this process. You look at this, the Colorado State Patrol, when you look at all their DUIs in 2018, the other legal drug, alcohol, still dominated almost 70% of the DUIs in your state were alcohol related, 69% actually. Of the 31 others, you look at 67% of those involve marijuana. Just another stat that lets you know that marijuana's role is playing an increasing role with respect to impaired drivers on your highways, as it is in the other states that have commercialized this substance. So we talk a little bit about taxation, and we always talk at this topic about how much revenue are we going to generate, but we very rarely talk about what it cost us. And since I'm coming to you from Kentucky, I think it's only fair that you see my 5 wonderful grandkids here, because this is why I do what I do. It's always and is always going to be about our children. And I've got 5 great ones. She's 16, the brunette. My grandson's 14. The one in the middle is 7. The young lady is 3, and the youngster with the passy is 2 years old. And this is what this is really all about. And what is it going to cost our children in the long term? So let's talk about revenue, because that's always the question. And that's what was proposed to you all in the other states. When we do this, we are going to reap a windfall taxation from this, but very little discussion about what it's going to cost. And here gives you a snapshot of what you all have actually taken in from the Colorado Department of Revenue. And you look at why you moved to commercial and why the other states. And what we saw is a pendulum shift from California, first medicalized this to the first commercial state, took about 16 years. Phase 2, the states from 2010 on that medicalized took about 7 years to go commercial. Now what we're seeing is a 1 to 2 year shift from medicalization to commercialization for this very reason. And this stat tells you why. You look at the amount of revenue in blue in 2018 that you took in, 253 million in commercial sales as opposed to 13 million in medical sales, and then your other licensing and fees on there. Somewhere in the neighborhood of about 270 million in 18 in total tax revenue. What I understand, Dale and I reached out to the Colorado Department of Revenue. Your 2019 numbers will approach somewhere close to 300 million total in tax revenue, with the same proportional distribution between commercial and recreational. Again, without any discussion of what the long-term consequences. And here's the greatest thing we can look at. And understand, we have a rich history in this country with respect to taxation with the other 2 legal drugs, talking about tobacco and alcohol. What we know in all levels of revenue generation with alcohol, that we end up taking in about $15 billion in this country with respect to alcohol revenue, but we cost society about $14 for every one that we take in. In this country with tobacco revenue, we take in about 16 to 18 billion tax dollars, but we cost $20 for every one that we take in. Granted, we don't have the level of marijuana use that we have with tobacco or alcohol use. And you look at the Centennial study in Colorado that was done a year or two ago, and they basically looked at your state and came to the conclusion that for every one tax dollar you're taking in, it's costing you $4.50. And I suspect that as we continue to see a rise in the number of admitted marijuana users, that we are going to see similar societal costs. And we're just not asking those questions. And we continue not to ignore that. And when you put it in a broader perspective, all of the money that you take in, not only from medical, from commercial, from licensing fees, it's 0.9% of your general fund budget. And I suspect that a local level that number will probably not be that much different. Again, without any discussion about what is the downstream effect. And here's what we tried to do. In NMI last year, we tried to actually fund a longitudinal economic analysis in your state, cost benefit analysis. And we sent out an RFP, and some of the leading think tanks and addiction economists in this country basically reached back out to us and said, you know what, this is a really good proposal. However, in order to get true causation with respect to what it's going to cost you, we're not there yet. We're too early in this process. We're probably still another 5, maybe 7 years away from really getting a true indication of what societal costs are going to be. But all of them told us basically we don't expect that the percentage based on the number of users will be much different than what we're seeing with alcohol or tobacco. And again, we're driving down that trail with a promise of money without any discussion of what the downstream consequences are with respect to what it's going to cost us as a society. Quality of life issues. And I want to make the same statement here. I'm not saying that marijuana causes this, but I think when you start talking about quality of life issues, and when we talk about this, I'm not even going to have time to go into what are your, property values and issues like that. But you look at the level of property crimes in your state since 2008, and then you look at violent crimes in your state. Take a look at these numbers again. I'm not going to tell you that there's causation here, but there's something you need to look at. I can tell you what Mitch Morrissey told me, who was the turned out prosecutor for Denver. He said, heck yes, there's a clear causation analysis. That's Mitch Morrissey's names. That's not mine. He was the prosecutor in Denver that turned out a year ago. He says, by all means, there's a clear association between marijuana legalization and the uptick in property crimes and violent crimes in the city of Denver. But again, that comes out of his mouth, not mine. You look at other quality, and you look at emergency room visits and hospitalizations related to marijuana, and you see a break between 15, and you actually see a downtick in 2015. And let me explain, and I've got some, that's when we started to migrate between the ICD-9 and ICD-10 coding. And that happened about September. So 2015 is only about 9 months of data. And they started a migration in coding and hospital coding in September of 15 that carried over into 16. And for some reason, a man must have invented this system because the ICD-9 didn't talk to the ICD-10. So literally what you probably need to reference on is what's happened from 16 on with ICD-10. And it'll be interesting to see where we go in 2018 and in 2019 with those numbers, to see if they actually go up with respect to emergency room admissions and hospitalizations related to marijuana toxicity, because you can overdose on this substance and people are showing up in the EDs and are being hospitalized because of it. And again, to me, You look at percent of treatment, why age groups are seeking treatment, and you look at this marijuana. And I think what's alarming is in the 12 to 17 group nationally, 12 to 17-year-olds, marijuana is the #1 reason that these folks are seeking admission for treatment for addiction in this country, not in Colorado, but in this country. 17, 12 to 17-year-olds, marijuana is the #1 substance that they are seeking admission for treatment for addiction. And you look at these numbers, 26 and above, but marijuana plays a significant role in why young people are seeking admission for treatment for addiction. And I guess I want to kind of bring this home and ask you a series of questions. You know, regulation, effective regulation, does such a beast exist? Well, we don't think so in this country. Based on the models that we see, you all are touted as the model for effective regulation. And I kind of, look at that as almost oxymoronic, kind of like jumbo shrimp and happily married, two terms you don't often use synonymously. I guess I would ask you to ask yourself these questions. What is the black market like? Wendy's already given you a pretty good look. And I don't know if she's aware, but one of my colleagues in Riverside County, California, called me last night, sheriff's deputy. They went on an illegal, large illegal grow site, outdoor grow site in Riverside County, and found 6 individuals executed, when the 7th died on the way to the hospital in a rip and run at a large scale marijuana grow ops in Riverside, California. Your black market is alive and well and thriving, as it is in Washington, Oregon, Illinois. As a matter of fact, Illinois sold $100 million more in the first 6 months on the black market than they did on the legal market. So it is alive and well. Has legalization impacted the rate of crime in your area? Questions you should be asking, or maybe you should be inquiring, are your law enforcement departments tracking that? Have your property values suffered? Because what we know is in these large scale commercial grows that maybe the commercial property is soaring, but the residential property in the surrounding area, particularly with issues of noise abatement, smell issues, has suffered significantly. What about usage rates for all ages? How is that impacted in your county? And most particularly in the 12 to 25 year age group, because that is the group that's most adversely impacted by THC usage. How's your highway safety impacts been? What about quality of life issues? How has legalization impacted your schools? I think one slide there, and I think it was Henny, that one of your school superintendents said that the only thing that legal marijuana has done is brought more marijuana into his schools. Mental health and treatment concerns, because of potency, we are seeing levels of psychosis that are unprecedented. Also, the research is showing us that if young people have a predisposition to schizophrenia, we're seeing an early onset of schizophrenia because of high potency marijuana. We really don't know what the long-term consequences are of high potency marijuana, and we're probably not going to get a clear understanding till more of the research evolves, and we're still looking at several years down the road. But have you, or can you effectively regulate to control the unintended consequences? I use that term unintended. I don't think there's anything unintended about these consequences, because I think most of them were very intended by the industry, and an industry that has to survive by addiction. This is an addiction industry much as alcohol and tobacco is. When you look at the alcohol industry, it derives 80% of its property, 80% of its proceeds for 20% of its users. And then again, lastly, I would ask you to, what is the total cost of society? And it's not always about how much revenue you're going to make. What is it going to cost us? And right now, we just don't have a clear understanding. But what the leading addiction economists tell us is, as the numbers of marijuana users grow, that we are not even going to have a revenue neutral substance, that we're going to see numbers much akin to tobacco and alcohol based on the percent of users. What I would tell you, and I love Mark Twain's one of my favorite authors, and he made a statement. What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. What gets us into trouble, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And there is so much about this drug that just ain't so. I would encourage you to take a look at volume 6 of the Rocky Mountain HIDTA Impact Report. One of the things that your HIDTA in your backyard did was produce the very first impact report on the legalization of marijuana. They did so back in 2013. They have produced 5 subsequent volumes. The latest came out in 2016. Take a look at it for yourself. Volume 7 is due out in late October, and it will catch up what has occurred from September of 2019 to October of 2020. What we ask and what we tell folks, if you're going to make a decision on this, at least make an informed decision based on what the science and based on what the data is telling you about marijuana. And here are some of the resources. Our website, we've completely revamped it. I would encourage you to hit our website, thenmi.org. There is a host of information, impact reports, educational videos, emerging information on new research and data reports. There's a host of resources for you so that you can make an informed decision. Here is a little presentation survey. I'll leave it up for a minute. We'd like to know what you think, and if there's something that you don't like, or there's something else you'd like for us to stress. It's a 2 to 3 minute survey. It gives us some idea and some feedback on the presentation. And lastly, here's our contact information. Dale and I are the NMI. The two of us are the subject matter experts for all things marijuana for our 33 HIDTAs. We are here at your disposal. And if for some reason we run out of time on the Q&A, if you have a question that you'd like for me to answer, feel free to shoot it to me via email. I will be glad to answer any questions. I'm done. I'm going to stop this share and turn it back over to you.
Ed, thank you for an incredible presentation. Frankly, the more that I'm hearing from the 3 presenters today, the more I am convinced is that everybody in Lakewood, it should be mandatory to hear what we have just heard in the last 2 hours. Before I go to questions, however, I just want to say that the Lakewood Police Department is not keeping data on marijuana. I'll throw that out. And Jim Otton, who is with us today, I think he wanted to say a few words before we go to questions. Jim? Diane, Jim is muted.
I'm okay now, I think.
Okay.
As most of you who live in Lakewood and some others know, recreational marijuana, I prefer retail marijuana. Those are 2 interchangeable terms. It's going to be on the ballot this coming November 3rd. And when we take a look at, the ballot wording just came out yesterday, and I extracted that from the web page. And if you take a look at the title, what's called the submission clause, and the summary, it's extremely neutral or even somewhat favorable to the industry, with very little mentioned about this more significant potential impacts of this conversion from medical marijuana to recreational marijuana. The only really detailed statement that is indicated here is that the ordinance would allow only the owners of those medical marijuana businesses that were licensed and operating in good standing in Lakewood as of April 1st, 2020 to apply for a license to operate a retail marijuana store or retail marijuana cultivation facility. Hidden in the actual ordinance that's available also is a lot of bugaboos. And one of those is the term location. And this is defined in the proposed ordinance, is that the location has expanded to being more, not just one location, like one address. A location can now consist of several addresses, which means instead of a pot shop being just a small storefront in a strip mall, the recreational folks can buy the entire strip mall, even if there's separate addresses for the various stores in the strip mall. So that portends that there's intent to expand. The clause in the existing medical marijuana code that's in the city that limits the size of a shop has been completely deleted, with no reference to size limitations in the new proposed ordinance. One of the things that's interesting is that the last sentence in the summary says the ordinance would also make corresponding amendments to certain sections of the Lakewood Municipal Code, Chapter 5.51, concerning size, location, and relocation limitations. And then also talks a little bit about hours of operation. You'll notice that size is connected to limitations, and that's false. The ballot statement doesn't indicate that the size limitations for stores have been completely erased. In addition, in existing medical marijuana shops, there is a grow location that's often associated with the shop. And there's stores where you can actually drive by and realize that there's the sales in the front, and then the back end is a grow location. In the existing, the new legislation or ordinance, I should say, there's no requirement that in a new place, new location, that those two facilities be co-located. And you could have a pot shop that's selling retail or recreational marijuana, and then you could have a grow location at another locality. There are so many loopholes that are established in the changes to the existing medical marijuana code and the new proposed ordinance that we can anticipate that all of those, just based on the experience with the industry, we can expect that not only will the 11 medical marijuana shops that are presently occurring in the city, and they're mostly storefronts, small buildings, that they will proliferate and expand dramatically. Up in Wheat Ridge, early on back in 2014, there was a recreational grower and a businessman who wanted to put together a 3-story building occupying a large corner of a unused parking lot. And he actually went into construction on that business. And then somebody walked by and asked some of the workers, what's going on here? It says, and one of the workers said, we're putting together a big grow shop, a sales shop. Of course, Wheat Ridge had not allowed recreational marijuana at all, so that was very quickly stopped by the city officials. And we can imagine that you'll have multiple shops, large retail shops throughout the city on almost any lot that they can find and get started. And so we're talking about a situation where the city is interested in the revenue, and they projected $1 to $1.5 million of revenue once the things gets going. The most recent year, they had about $300,000 in revenue to the city. My feeling is that the city budget folks are underestimating the growth of the industry, and they could end up with a lot more revenue than they think. But they're also the huge costs, and I think are going to prove to be unreasonable. In fact, there may be $1 to $1.5 million in new costs to the city in terms of policing these places. And of course, there's no, except for the Lakewood Police Department, there's no one out there to really regulate or do anything to take a look at these things. So this is a very egregious marijuana, retail marijuana proposal and ballot initiative, and we should see far more than we're expecting, far more than the city is expecting in the way of proliferation of retail marijuana shops, and certainly be a detriment to the community. Oh, one more thing. The existing medical marijuana code restricts the number of shops by controlling the distance that has to occur between any given medical marijuana shop. That distance has changed from a little bit less than 4,000 feet down to 3,000 feet, which means you could squeeze in more of the recreational marijuana shops in the existing city. And of course, there's going to be limits based on codes, building codes, and zoning and that sort of thing. But this industry will find any way they can to squeeze in as much as they possibly can. And I think we're going to, there's a brag that we're going to do a lot better than Edgewater. We'll crowd out Edgewater in terms of marijuana sales on the west side of town. And to me, that's a terrible thing and not a wonderful thing. So I would ask that each of you can consider, especially if you live in Lakewood, to help us out. Fairly shortly, we'll be involved in putting together a issue committee to take a look at how we can block this, and we're going to need a lot of help. Anyhow, if you want to do that, contact Ramey, since you have good contact information for her, and indicate that you might be willing to help out to help block recreational marijuana sales in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. I do not see any questions in the chat line, although I do have a question myself. If there is an automobile accident, is there a way at the point of the accident that you test for THC?
Well, that presents problems because, we have a clear science on what impairment looks like with alcohol. And that's why you've got your presumptive levels in states, 0.08. We know how the body processes alcohol. THC is differently. As far as roadside impairment detection devices that will detect THC on the breath or on the saliva, they currently do not exist. The problem with prosecuting DUIDs with marijuana is that it almost takes an advanced level of training with your police officer. And we're talking about DREs or drug recognition experts that are required to successfully prosecute those cases. And, the problem too, again, what we're seeing with THC is particularly with high potency is that even the minute you stop the administration of THC, the levels start to drop in the blood. However, impairment does not. Impairment can conversely continue to rise. And I'm talking about principally executive function. It can continue to rise hours after the THC level is dropped to non-detectable levels. I think Joe McGuire tomorrow is going to touch on that, and she will hit that pretty pronouncedly. But no, to answer your question, no, we do not have the capabilities. Your police officers don't have the capabilities of having a handheld device that will accurately determine THC impairment at a roadside.
Thank you, Ed. I still don't see any questions. I
have a couple of questions.
Oh, please, Jim, go ahead.
Is there any estimate currently on the percentage of illegal drugs versus the percentage of legal drugs sold in California? That I've seen two statements that 75 to 80% of 75 or 80%, depending on who's talking, of the drug business, marijuana business in California is illegal. Do we have any estimate at this point in time of what percentage of the pot business in Colorado is illegal? And I realize that may be difficult because much of it's being sent out of state.
Well, as far as I know, we don't have that number. We don't have a reliable number for that. No.
But you are right. In California, 80% of the market is illicit. I mean, they have not come under governmental control, even though in 2018 they commercialized their industry. They basically don't have the enforcement mechanism to ensure compliance. And quite frankly, if I am a commercial entity that's operating outside of the taxation structure in that state, and the state doesn't have the wherewithal to come after me, why would I pay the fees to become a legally licensed entity commercially within that state? So California is still at the 80% mark of grow ops that are not under state compliance yet.
Another, this is more of a comment. Um, Wendy, there was a piece done by, I think it was Channel 7 on one of your DEA illegal busts of grow houses. And one of the comments that was, or one of the things that was noted was that the individuals that were operating the grow houses were all Chinese nationals, many of whom did not speak a language, Chinese language that where you could bring in a translator and try to talk to them. Even more importantly, you indicated that the monies from these Chinese-based operations were going to the third party and then sent back to China, and then the Chinese money was coming back, being washed and brought back into the U.S. to purchase more homes. And I'd like to point out that in communist China, there are no businesses that are over a certain dollar value that are not controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And this is based on comments by several different groups that are monitoring all kinds of things going on in China. So in effect, the Chinese illegal grow industry is funding the Chinese Communist Party, and they don't have any particular interest in helping the United States to remain a prosperous and healthy country. So that to me is one of the important aspects of it. And you sort of wonder with the Cuban illegal votes whether or not some of that money is not going back to that particular country also. And so that to me is I think a significant aspect of a lot of the illegal operations, that money doesn't even stay in the U.S. Much of it may be going back to other countries that don't have much of the way of a positive interest in the United States.
Thank you. Jim, did you have any other comments or questions?
Yes, there are two publications that have come out recently. One is Cannabis in Medicine by Ken Finn down in Colorado Springs. He's a pain medicine specialist, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through reading it, and there's 20 different articles plus a foreword that with over 2,300 references in the articles that cover almost all aspects of cannabis and in medicine, and the related socioeconomic problems that are associated with it. The foreword alone is worth the price of the book. It is paywalled, and it's a little bit over $100 to buy the book. And you just type in cannabis in medicine, and you'll get referred to in Google, and you'll see it come up. Another one that I just recently learned about is cannabis use disorder. And for those that don't recognize or understand why this is called a cannabis use disorder, the American Psychiatric Association has what's called the DSM, that's now DSM-5. Basically, it's a manual that discusses or that talks about what are recognized psychiatric disorders, and cannabis use disorder is included in the DSM-5, and it's worthwhile knowing or understanding that the medical community is now recognizing the serious issues associated with cannabis use. There's also called cannabis-induced psychosis, or CIP. I don't know whether CIP is also in the DSM-5. I haven't been able to track that down. But we're talking about when you see American Psychiatric Association and virtually all of the medical associations, all the law enforcement groups across national law enforcement groups saying that cannabis or marijuana is a serious issue. And we just have an industry that is devastating to to individuals and to communities and society in general. And we need to do all we can to block it every time they make a move to expand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Please, for one thing, I'd like to thank the speakers today. We've gone over, and I appreciate very much your time that you've given for this. It is an extremely important issue in Lakewood at this time. Let me just briefly say who the speakers will be tomorrow. Today was part one of the Marijuana Summit. Tomorrow is the second part of the Marijuana Summit. My first guest will be Matt. He is the Chief Deputy DA with Jeffco and Gilpin counties for 25 years. And he will be describing issues related to marijuana in our legal system. Joe McGuire, who is Director of the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association, and she assists in keeping businesses drug-free. She is the second speaker tomorrow. And then the third speaker that Jim alluded to is Dr. Ken Finn. And he has specialized in pain medicine for 25 years and is nationally recognized regarding the medical impacts of marijuana. But in closing, I would just like to say that this has been recorded. Tomorrow it will be recorded. I hope that those of you who have listened today will refer your friends to this program, and everybody, frankly, should hear what we all heard this morning.
Excuse me, I did post a question in the chat earlier. So I reposted it because for some reason it didn't seem to be showing up.
Okay, please go ahead. What is your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to change my WHN thing. This is Sylvia Frieder. And we've known each other for a long time. So I lost the Zoom there for a bit, and I saw a whole lot of products being flashed across the screen, household things, lifesaver ointments, this, that, and the other. And I didn't understand, because I had missed part of it, what the point was that THC is in those products.
Kenny, do you want to address that?
Sure, hi. Thank you for your question. Smart Colorado is an educational organization that looks to make sure that parents understand what today's commercialized marijuana looks like, and the fact that it comes in very many forms is sometimes quite surprising to parents when we go into schools, because we have no limits on the potency or the products or the methods of intake by which THC can be consumed. It's just important to raise awareness about what today's marijuana truly looks like. So and those are products that are the ones that I flashed across the screen today were all purchased in the recreational market.
Oh, now I understand. You're saying that the THC is very active in producing some kind of whatever effect.
THC does create a psychoactive effect.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's the high inducing component of the marijuana plant.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I believe that there are no further questions. Again, I'd like to thank you all for being with me today. In closing, number one, Ed, I'd like to thank you for bringing out the link between profit and loss on this. That is sometimes an issue that goes without being talked about. Thank you. That's important. This summit today and tomorrow is designed to help provide you, basically the voter, with the impacts of marijuana from people who are familiar with this. It is my hopes that you have learned from this and you can take that with you. Again, my speakers tomorrow are Matt Durkin, Joe McGuire, and Dr. Ken Finn. Please join me again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Diane, thank you for all that you've done to help. Thank you, folks. I hope this was helpful for you. Bye-bye.
Where did this Where do we get
Yes.
the,
Pardon
Yeah.
me,
you said it's recorded. Where do we get the recordings?
Diane?
I will have it available afterwards. Do you get Ramey's newsletter? I could put a link in there.
No, I don't.
I get it.
Ah, my wife gets it.
Okay. I will put a link to the recording of this and tomorrow's in her newsletter.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Very fine presentation. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Goodbye.